Good evening and welcome to the October 8th Grafton School Committee meeting. Before we start, I wanted to give a chairperson's update very quickly. We have a lot of great district events coming up. I'd like to wish everybody a happy and safe homecoming. And I'd also like to remind the community about South Grafton PTO's Oktoberfest, which is coming up on October 19th, as well as town meeting, which is October 21st. I'd also like to welcome our newest member, James Dewar, as our new student rep. James is a junior at Grafton High. Welcome. And James, if you'd like, we'd love to hear a little bit about yourself. If you want to take a few minutes. Tyler just laughed at you, so welcome aboard.
My name is James Dewar. I'm a junior at Grafton High School. I'm on the golf team, and I'll be playing basketball coming winter. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, we're really happy to have you as well. So James is coming up. It's a 2-year term, so he'll shadow Tyler this year, and next year he'll get to lead and shadow our next junior and student rep. So we're super happy to have you. So welcome. And then I'll move any comments from the public. Great, and I'm going to turn it right over to Tracy for her educational report. You don't have anything in addition to your...
I do not.
Okay, excellent. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to share what's happening throughout the district to support student learning tonight. And with that said, I'm going to start with the work that we've been doing on the math curriculum. And you might remember that that work began in earnest last spring when I held a K-12 math summit that consisted of teachers and administrators who met to really discuss what is the state of math in the district. My goal was to really determine what supports are needed to ensure students are successfully learning math skills and practices. And so what we did as a K-12 team is we looked at by grade level what is working currently in math instruction, what might be impeding students' progress, and what might we need to do differently to improve student learning. And we did this by grade level and right through across grades K-12. What we did is we kind of had a conversation and we determined some themes. And then I asked, as an exit ticket, the teachers to kind of think about a hypothetical situation that they had been currently named assistant superintendent of Grafton Public Schools, and they were given the list of concerns that we just generated in regards to math and math instruction, and given that list and their role, what would they prioritize? What would they work on first and why? And there you can see a snapshot as to what each grade level identified as a priority for them. I took a look at that and determined really what would be the themes and where should we begin. And it was very clear to me that we had to take a look at our power standards and our K-12 curriculum maps. We had to take a look at potentially rescoping the sequence of what we believed were the main skills in terms of depth of coverage and the ways in which we teach math in terms of conceptual understanding. In addition to that, it was pretty clear to me that we needed to investigate, select, and pilot a tool that would provide teachers with progress monitoring data, and it would allow students to engage in adaptive practice during the school day to improve any gaps they may be seeing in their math understanding. And so we began last spring with the math power standards, and that's why I have Mary here. Mary took the lead on this work with the K-12 teachers. She did a fantastic job, worked very, very hard, got a tremendous amount done, and I want to honor what she did by allowing her to speak to their work.
So something that really resonated with me through Tracy's discussions with the teachers were they were feeling like they were teaching a million things to students who were not able to take a million things with them to the next grade level. So it goes back to a mile wide and an inch deep. And so the Tim's report stated that we as a country are offering way too many topics, and we're only superficially able to teach those to students. And the teachers were agreeing that students were not owning anything, that they were going to the next grade with a little bit and not a lot of depth of knowledge. So what we did was we looked at the state standard, our atlas, and our report card, and I had them go through an exercise that determined what they felt needed to be mastered at their grade level, what needed introduction and what needed practice. Because what was happening is when you try to teach everything to the 10th degree, you're not able to teach anything to the 10th degree, because you're moving through topics at such a fast pace, and whoever grabs it, you're just dragging everybody else with it. So the idea behind the introduction, the mastery, and the practice is not everyone will be able to master everything you present. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to present those skills at the grade level, because you're building a brick house over the years. They will see in math the same skills year after year, but each year you are determining which of those skills they're mastering at that year. And the teachers were really, they did it for grade level bands, and then they met with the band below them and the band after them and talked about whether they agreed with the same decisions they were making. And it was really a cohesive conversation. And what the greatest piece of it was, we did this K through 12, and we talked about it across grade levels. That's the first time we've really been in the room together. And the appreciation for what everyone was doing was so immense. And it was really, for high school teachers to honor what kindergarten teachers were doing in math was really very enlightening, and they loved being with each other. And the high school teachers were able to then communicate to them what they needed kids to know before they came to them. And so we really just started those rich conversations. We're going to have to build and really refine what those things are over the next couple of years. But I think the fact that we were all on the same page and that we got all of those conversations to light was really, really critical. And so then I think the other piece was we looked at the report cards and we were trying to make decisions about what gets reported out. Because when I feel like in curriculum work, you have to revisit over and over what this is. You can't write a curriculum and then just say that's what we're going to do. And unfortunately, teachers are usually given a set of recommendations in curriculum. They're not told how to teach it. So they have to really grapple with how are they going to teach it and when are they going to teach it. So that's the work that we're doing.
Any questions for Mary on the math power standards before I go on?
I had a question about, we've in the past perhaps emphasized speed with the kids in the elementary schools and their math facts. Do you see that changing as we move forward? Because I know that's, for some kids, that's a big problem. It's not that they don't know them, it's that they're not getting them fast enough.
Right. So we run into that a little bit with even reading fluency. At some point, kids level out. They're going to have the pace that they have, but I feel like we need to expose them in being more automated or automatic in fluency at the younger grades. And so you'll see it I guess, emphasized more so at the younger grades, but we do value it throughout. I think what we are getting away from is the timing of it. So we want kids to build their fluency, but we're not holding them to the same standard as every other student. When we devalue that, we notice it decreases. And I know you will see it on report cards, but we have found over the years, we've done it a couple of different ways, and the more we emphasize it, the more we feel like we're able to assess it and move forward with it. I will say that the middle school teachers and the high school teachers have repeated to us over and over, kids who do have automaticity succeed in math because they're not struggling with recalling the numbers. They're able to then take the numbers and apply it to the concepts and skills. But again, we have to balance that. We have to be able to read students. We don't want students to be anxious about math. And that's why we have to understand that we need to meet them where they are and develop the skills that they need, each of them on their own.
Was it last year that we moved to the integrated curriculum?
Yes.
In math? So is that gonna have to be revisited again, or do we need to, I guess, how is that gonna work with everything that you're now finding out?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I think the high school is part of this discussion, so they actually, and one other thing I wanted to mention that was exciting that we did, was they looked at it in that regard, like what they wanted those courses to include, what were the priorities. And I think it was really clear that everyone who taught those courses had that time to talk about what they do value. Because as they move up through those, they will have to emphasize different things at different time based on students' developmental level and what they're able to cognitively think about. But the other piece I forgot to tell you was we did a flow chart across the grades. So we started at kindergarten, and we had the high school teachers. I think Tom Gamache was the one who did this. And he did a progression of skills in fractions. And so he walked the entire group through where fractions begin in his mind at kindergarten and how they go up through the grades. And it was really interesting for all teachers, and we hope to do that with a number of things. We're able to see where it pieced together and what the big ideas were in fractions, which has been a topic that is challenging for kids because they don't have enough time manipulating the fractions. It's very abstract and not concrete enough for kids.
I just have a quick question. What is the structure of the summit moving forward? How often will you guys be able to meet? And is it literally every math teacher K through 12?
So the summit has essentially disbanded. The original attendance of the summit was 1 to 2 teachers per grade level to meet for the original half day of work together. Then based on what we decided needed to be done, we would then reconvene different committees. So Mary then pulled K through 12 to look at power standards, and it was a couple of teachers per grade level. And when I put together a committee on for the online tool, I'll just put out a call for representation from each grade level, each school, to see who would like to come on board, take a look at tools, and potentially pilot. Any other questions for Mary?
I think Jen and Heather both kind of touched on mine, but so I think I'm trying to figure out, so what's really like next steps besides what you just said, Tracy? So is there additional kind of going back to the curriculum or thinking about, and then did you look at the college level? Did the high school teachers look at what colleges are expecting?
Right. So I think in my mind, math, we always need to have conversations about. We're struggling with how to actually include the most amount of people in those conversations. So we're going to be talking about how we can do that and how we can make those rich conversations available to everyone. So part of the summit was they went back to their grade level teams and communicated what we had talked about. I shared the PowerPoint with all the reflections. They shared it with their teams. So we hope to, in every way that we can, keep that conversation alive. But we feel like what really surfaced from this work was that there were a lot of students who were struggling to keep up on grade level. So we needed to find a way to support the students who were struggling and bring everyone along. And I think that was kind of critical mass. We needed to do that first before we hit everything else.
Do you
Would
feel like
agree?
you have the resources and the staffing to be able to do that amongst all your other duties?
So I find the time to
Yeah,
do
thank
that
you.
as much as I can. I would never turn down resources. I think resources would be highly beneficial. But
So the truth is, Mary's the assistant principal at
Right.
Milbury Street.
Yeah.
I tapped Mary's talent and expertise in math to support this work, and Mary is just a natural when it comes to curriculum development. So this was basically an additional job for Mary that is not going to go away this year. As Mary said, we've already met several times. We're going to talk about pulling grade spans together to continue the conversation and to see what kind of PD they may need as well, and start looking for those types of resources. So to say that we have the resources would not be accurate. We really need math specialists, because that's who I would be tapping for resources and support, going actually into the buildings and working with teachers.
And do you feel like you have enough time with the half-day PDs that you're available?
So at this point in time, I am not using the half-day PDs because they have been dedicated to the district-wide initiative on social-emotional learning. I am actually pulling teachers for half-day or 2 or 3 hours. And I think, you're going to see pretty quickly that the curriculum in this school district is tightly aligned vertically K through 12. And one of the reasons that has come to be is because Jay does allow me to pull the teachers and have large groups of teachers vertically meet together and talk through what are their needs and in what ways can I support them. So I think, the place that we're in math, while it is just beginning, we've made a tremendous amount of momentum and progress because of Mary and her willingness to go above and beyond, because of Jay and his willingness to release the teachers, and obviously because of the teachers themselves and their concern for their kids.
Thank you. Thank you again, Mary.
I'm going to allow Mary to step out simply because I have about 25 more slides.
All right. Any other questions? James, Tyler? No? Anybody?
Mary.
Thank you,
Mary,
Mary.
thank you.
Thank
Always
you,
good
Mary.
to
I
see you.
appreciate it, hon. So I think I mentioned that what surfaced pretty quickly among the teachers during the summit is that they really felt a gap for them is they didn't have the data that they need in terms of student progress toward meeting grade level standards. They talked at length about how we have a lot of data around reading and literacy. And one teacher in particular she really impressed me. She said, at the start of any school year, I have pages and pages of data on my students in terms of their reading and their literacy, so I know exactly where to start, but I have nothing on them for math. So it takes me 2 or 3 months to figure out where they are, and I already feel like I'm behind. So what we are going to do, and I'm going to start this probably in a week or two, is I'm going to put an all call out to staff who are interested in joining a online platform committee to research 3 or 4 online tools that will provide progress monitoring data for teachers to inform their instruction and will allow students to do adaptive practice in math during the school day, so that we have that data that teachers need right from the start, right from the get-go, to understand who their students are and what they need in terms of math. So I'm looking forward to that, and I can continue to update you on that process throughout the year.
Tracy, can you just give a quick definition of adaptive practice?
Sure. So what the tool does is it basically gives you a mini assessment to see what you already understand, and then it raises the level so that you move to the next more complex piece of that skill, and it keeps adapting it until you move on to the next skill.
Okay, thank you.
Wow.
Okay. So I'd like to speak a little bit about social studies because you may recall that last year DESE released a new framework after 10 years. And the framework really is a different lens in terms of social science study because the focus is on practice standards, or what we would say the skills used by a historian. So really we're no longer, is not a focus on content, it's more a focus on skills. And a major change is that the Board of Education really embedded a very highly focused look at civics, K through 12. It starts right in kindergarten and goes all the way through 12th grade, with specifically major changes in grade 8. As a matter of fact, grade 8 went completely away and is now entirely a civics-based curriculum. Adam and I have been working together. We ran a K through 6 curriculum committee last year and a 7 through 12. Adam and I then met as a middle school team, and we spoke at length about what he thought might be the benefits of moving to a civics-based education. And he says here that he thought that it was great that kids are now going to be very introspective and proactive regarding the needs of their community, and that he feels like they're already beginning to take some ownership in terms of their part in the government and the community around them. A part of that civics education is that students have to do a research project. Adam has already created one with his team. They're going to look at a community-based issue. They're going to create a plan to either bring awareness or find a solution to it. They're going to create a video or a YouTube video or some sort of presentation, and then they're going to present it, a whole group. So he's very excited about it, and I'm looking forward to seeing it when the students are done. The high school curriculum changed as well, and I really love the fact that Jocelyn and her department took this opportunity to really change the way high school students study social science. In essence, they took the practice standards and they moved to a thematic study of social science. So a great example of that would be they are now going to offer a course called The U.S.'s Role in World Affairs. So what they'll do is they'll take components of US 1 and US 2 that relate to that theme. They will teach that through the practice skills that are really the skills of a historian. And when Jocelyn came to me with this idea, I loved it because I think it meets most of what you see on the board in terms of the benefits. I think it puts social studies in a larger context of knowledge and helps students build those relationships and connections across disciplines and time periods. I love that in many ways it more closely resembles how we learn in terms of themes. And I think that it absolutely hones into the idea of it being student-centered, incorporating their own personal interests and needs. And I think it's going to be a fantastic change. Fine Arts is also coming out with a new framework. The framework went out for approval, I believe, in July, so I'm expecting it any day now. Believe it or not, the fine arts standards that are being taught right now are 20 years old. So at first glance, when I looked at them in the summer, it looks like they've made the content standards in fine arts broader and more generic. I believe they have done that because they are really looking to move more towards choice-based art and more towards the habits of mind. So when I talked to the art teachers about that, and we started to have initial conversations, we met the other day about the report card, I think what the art teachers are most interested in is how can they develop students' skills and habits of mind in terms of creating and responding to art. And they were looking for using a variety of assessment methods and looking to make connections in terms of kind of cross-discipline and how we can look at art as a whole. One of the things I think is very exciting is that Sarah Camry, who is our teacher at North Street, has taken it upon herself to take some graduate courses on choice-based art. She's moved her entire classroom to that focus and is willing to offer some PD to our teachers and teachers in neighboring districts in the spring on how we can take those content standards and teach them through entirely choice. And with that, I'm going to move off of curriculum and into instruction. And I think that the committee knows that we are in our second year of social-emotional learning this year. And I think we've really loved how it started to build a foundation for students' emotional intelligence and the idea of academic rigor through building social-emotional skills. What's going to happen this year, really, I'm hoping, is a transfer of learning. We spent last year looking at doing a kind of a broad, intensive study of what is social-emotional learning, what are the foundational elements of it. This year, administrators and I are going to help teachers embed that in their practice. How do we build those skills and competencies into daily instruction explicitly, but seamlessly, so that it's not one more thing, but it's just part of the daily lesson? So I'm looking forward to that. As in the past, the schools have differentiated their approach to the district initiative. So in addition to embedding SEL in classroom instruction, the K-1 building is also piloting a program called Second Step. Second Step complements responsive classroom, and it fits in beautifully with SEL because there are lessons on empathy, friendship, emotional management. So it's kind of the next tier of responsive classroom, and it gives teachers and students just another look at how to support SEL. The 2 through 6 schools are doing a book study on a book that came very highly recommended to me from folks up in Boston, Transforming Ed. It's called All Learning is Social Emotional. And when I talked to Steve and Joanne about this book and what they're really excited about pulling from it, I think Steve did a nice job of synopsizing for me that they're really looking at how can they take identity and agency as a larger component of SEL. How do they take that and build that into their instruction? And so Steve says here, I want teachers to reflect on how they achieve these targets instructionally, but also learn additional ways from each other. And so that will be the crux of their work during their half PD days. The middle school and the high school are going to engage in some PD on how to support students who have been or who are currently suffering from trauma. How do we support their ability to engage and participate with rigorous grade level standards in a way that they feel safe and supported? In addition to that, the high school is going to start investigating the how of implementing social emotional learning. They're looking at integration through the curriculum, through online technologies, and obviously beyond the classroom into any kind of extracurricular. So as you can see, each building kind of put its own spin on how they're going to look at social emotional learning based on the needs in the building. We sent 12 math teachers to the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics this fall, and I asked the teachers to send me a synopsis of what their big takeaways were from the conferences. First of all, I've never seen a more positive outpouring from 12 teachers. It must have been probably one of the best workshops they've ever put on. Every math teacher got back to me immediately with, this was really a valuable use of our time, which was fantastic. But I think Jenny Durast, who you may know as the department head at Grafton High School, really summarized what they learned beautifully. She talks about how they have to teach, that teaching by telling, showing, and practicing simply fails students, that they have to move to clarity of goals, rich tasks, focused intentional questions, opportunities for discussion, multiple representations, alternative approaches. I could go on and on. I mean, I heard things like, I have to start building more visuals into my lessons. I have to allow students to use their voice to internalize math concepts. I have to start engaging in more retrieval practice. I was very, very impressed with what the math teachers took back from this conference. I think what I have to do on my end is to make sure that I have the funding to make sure that more teachers can go. It really should be a K through 12 offering as opposed to a 5 through 12. So with that, I want to talk a little bit about impactful practice. I think the committee knows that every year I run a voluntary after-school professional learning community on instructional practice. It's called Impactful Practice because essentially what we do is we look at the instructional strategies to see if they make an impact. This year we're going to run a couple of different books. North Grafton has picked a book that focuses on specific strategies to embed SEL in the classroom. Grafton Middle School is looking at strategies for teaching boys and girls at the secondary level. North Street has picked the same book, but at the elementary level. Essentially what that book does is it really taps into ways that we can make our content and our skills-based instruction more visual and spatial for our male learners, our visual spatial learners. And last but not least is a book called Why Didn't I Learn This in College? That really was my Bible when I first started presenting many, many years ago. It has a host of very rigorous, engaging instructional strategies for any content area, and the high school in Millbury Street will be using that to pilot some lessons this year. And finally, in terms of supporting all learners, I want to speak a little bit to our 2019 MCAS results. As you can see from this chart, we have done a very nice job of making good progress toward meeting very aggressive standards that are based on several factors that are including achievement, growth, and then some attendance and other high school completion targets. Our students, as you may know from my update, are continuing to achieve well above the state in the different content areas. In terms of ELA growth, I think that you all know from previous presentations, I am most concerned about growth simply because growth tells me a lot about pedagogy and resources. It helps me understand directly how to support teachers, and it helps me understand how much students are learning from a year-to-year basis. This state will tell you that the range of moderate growth is 40% to 60%, and so I want you to see here that we're doing outstanding when it comes to growth in ELA. I happen to target grade 6 because that's pretty outstanding growth right there. So we're on track in growth for ELA. I did see a small dip in 4th and 5th grade in math this year. We're close to 40%, but we're a little bit below it. So I've talked to the administrators, and we've come up with an action plan for how to support that dip. I think the first thing that's going to help with that dip is the work that Mary has done to rescope the scope and sequence in grades K through 12 standards to ensure depth of coverage. So when she talked about going deep as opposed to broad. So we're going to go a little bit deeper. As you know, I'm going to select an online tool and have teachers pilot it. And then Mary and I have talked at length about what kind of professional development can we start offering in district, not so much out of district, but what can Mary and I develop in district to support grade levels with. And we talked a little bit about how we might want to embed more open response writing in the math instruction with an eye on their ability to justify their answer. I think sometimes what happens with students is they simply answer, but they don't justify and therefore don't get the points they need for the math. We want to make sure that there are several high-quality resources for number sense in daily practice. Number sense is the one thing that comes up time and time again, it really gets to your question about fluency and automaticity. Time and time again, because as Mary explained, if they don't have the automaticity, as the material gets harder, they can't do it because their brain is spending so much time trying to figure out what the addition or the subtraction or the fractions, that they lose the complexity piece and they can't answer it. So more focus on number sense. We're looking at high quality tasks to increase rigor. And I think we're going to look at, and I am going to work with Bob in terms of looking at an intervention tool, how Envision might be used to do that as well. So there's a fair amount for me to do on the district end in terms of that slight dip. I don't know if the board is aware, but I've done a fair amount to work with Grafton High School student support. Last year, I had the pleasure of helping two teams put together a transition program and a student support program in the building. And what came out of the work through the student support program was the need for a second academic development center. This surfaced as a need for a small population that might not be served well enough in a bigger ADC1, as they call it, that they might need some more focused attention from a teacher. And so we have Lisa Anzidi, who is a highly respected paraprofessional at the high school, manning our ADC2, and she has done a fantastic job. On her own, she has let students let students select goals and come up with reflections and gather data from teachers to make sure they're making the progress they need. We are currently talking about creating a peer tutoring program as well, so that students will come in during a free period and help the students there with math and or English. And finally, we are in talks with Jason Cody and Jim Pignataro and Carla Evers and our new director of guidance, Sharon Buckley, about creating a senior internship program. I guess this was something that surfaced several years ago, so Jason Cody sat on a committee with several people, and he has a fair amount of work already put in place to have something done. So we're to have a pilot run, I should say, in the spring. So this is what we initially have set up for a small pilot beginning in the spring. It would look at seniors, so maybe 10 to 15 seniors would start at the beginning of fourth quarter. They would spend 25 hours a week in their internship. They would be required to maintain their commitment to extracurriculars, performance art, and or any AP courses they're involved in. They would work at a specific location and provide their own transportation. They would not be compensated for this work. They would, Jason would be our coordinator, and he would be in direct contact with the internship site and supervisor, and we would have an application process and a year-end showcase. The tentative timeline right now, as long as we've got everything up and running, which we appear to be able to do, they'll have a meeting in December, applications open in January, deadline March, and then with approval coming in at April 1st, checkout form mid-April, and then the internship starts with that final showcase during senior final week. And with that, I can take questions on all of that. There's a lot of information.
I'll start with the MCAS.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the change going from, was it like the legacy test into what they, I don't know what they call it now, like the new test? Do you think that affected like maybe the growth?
It might have been the online component, that all of a sudden they were taking a math test on a computer. I've heard some feedback from kids that was very difficult to do. They were not used to that. What I have to do with the principals is sit down and take a look at if we fell below the state in any standards. Mm-hmm. You may remember when I had curriculum coordinators, we would come up with action plans that were very specifically targeted to curriculum. So if there was a dip in any of the grade levels, I would pull with the coordinator. So it would have been Kristen Gasper, who was math. Kristen and I would have sat down and looked at where did we fall below the state and what standards. And then we would go into grade 4 teacher leaders and say, this is what we're seeing. Let's look at what your scope and sequence looks like. Are you teaching it? How long are you teaching it for? What is the rigor and complexity of those assignments and those assessments? And we'd look at it from that lens. So I'm going to try to still do that, but I have to kind of do it through the principals because I don't have any coordinators.
Right. And then I was gonna say something else about the internships. I'm glad that it's coming to fruition finally, so it'd be nice to see. Is it gonna be difficult with the rotating schedule? How is that?
So
to work?
it will not be difficult with the rotating schedule because students would not be required to attend class unless they had AP. And if they have AP classes, they have to make arrangements with their internship site supervisor, that they have to be in school in AP classes during specific times. But it's only an overlap of a couple of weeks, so it shouldn't be too disruptive.
Yeah, especially, I guess, once the exams are in May, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. I was more concerned like how that was gonna work. But no, but I'm glad to see it happen, I'm excited to see what's come the final presentation, what's gonna be like.
Yeah, me too.
Does anybody else have a question? So thank you so much, Tracy.
You're very welcome.
I had a quick question about the internship programs as well, which I'm very excited about. I know we talked about it several years ago, and thanks to Jason Cody for kind of heading this up with the team. Is there going to be a reach out to local businesses and parents? Okay.
That's already started.
That's already, to give like you have a starting place
Yes.
on how to do it?
Yes, so Jason started with first tapping into our own community
Yeah.
at the school and saying, this is our idea. Do you know of anyone who would be willing to sponsor students?
Yeah.
And then he's going to tap in through our business department, local businesses, and then he's going to go further. Like I'll have a write-up for Jay to put in his newsletter.
Perfect.
The principal put something out in his newsletter, and so we'll start spreading it little by little.
Great.
Okay.
Terrific. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Tracy?
All set.
That was great. Thank you, Tracy.
You're welcome. Thank
Really
you.
Good to see you. Thanks for all your work. Okay. So next on our agenda is later start time discussion. And I wanted to frame this on what I was, I guess, thinking. Of course, we could take it in a different direction. But in our packets, Jay had put in the Grafton later start time committee recommendations that we looked at April 30th, 2019. Heather and Amy, I know you weren't on the committee. However, you both were on this committee, so I felt very comfortable that you were both, in fact, Amy presented to us about the recommendations. So what I wanted to do, because I know this is a pretty hot button, is we never had a chance to digest what was given to us because of the timing. Right after that, we didn't meet really pretty much all of May. We hit June. We didn't have a full committee. I know Melissa isn't here tonight. But we never really had a chance to digest this. And I had questions, are you voting on this tonight? And we are not voting on it tonight because for us to even, I think, vote on something, we would have to do several steps to even get to a vote, which would be having, obviously, community forums, working with teachers. There's many things that have to happen. I personally, and you can also disagree, I wanted to get a pulse of the committee to see if this was something, once we've digested these recommendations, we've seen the costs, we've definitely heard a lot of feedback. Of course, I'm sure we would always hear more. If this was something we even wanted to go down the path. Because to go down the path, requires a lot of steps before I think we could take a vote. So that, I think I wanted to hear people's opinions on what they thought. Are these recommendations things that we want to truly consider? Or is it something that maybe we just don't feel like we can move on right now? So that is how I feel about it, and I really wanted to hear, we've not discussed this kind of as a committee together. And that was my thought on how we could frame this, but again, open to other discussions.
Want James and Tyler to maybe give a,
I would
Heads
love
up,
to hear from James and Tyler. Of course. Tyler?
Must have picked a bad time to run out. I had to
No.
run out the quick. What are we?
We, what I just said is, and you were here, James, you were not here. We had a wonderful presentation, and again, I can't thank the people that served on this committee enough, especially Maureen Cullen, who ran the committee, and all of us served on it, but we had a lot. We had students, we had teachers, it was a full committee. They did a ton of work on this, and they did a great job, and I want to honor them, and I don't want them to think that their work went to waste, because it didn't. What I just said, Tyler, I don't know when you came back in, was we haven't had a chance to discuss this or digest what they gave us because of the timing of it, which was late spring, and just a series of events happened that we weren't able to really talk about it. But I feel like I wanted to get a pulse of the committee if this was something that we still want to pursue, because if we do we have a lot of other things that have to happen before we need to take a vote. And I think Jen wanted to know probably another student perspective, I suppose, of, I can't speak for you, you could speak for yourself.
Exactly. Just maybe what is your ideas of the later start time? Or,
On a purely personal, because I understand the science behind it. I really would rather not do it. I like the way the school is now. I know when you just talk with other people, it's sort of a mixed bag of opinions. Some people are completely for later start times. Other kids completely hate the fact that that would even ever happen. I know the main concerns around sports. Then other kids just say, like, if you push the school to start time back 30 minutes, they're just going to stay up 30 minutes later. So there's a lot of, I don't know if the kids who are against it necessarily know everything, all the work that's gone behind it, and that's just their gut reaction. But I know that especially within students, it's really mixed about whether they really want it or not.
welcome to the committee, James.
Well,
You're the vote. No, just kidding.
I agree with Tyler in saying that I enjoy getting out at 1:55. I don't know any other school that gets out earlier than that, which is 1:55 is very early. And I agree there's been a very mixed reaction. I've seen, there was a study that went viral I saw on Instagram that the teenage mind doesn't start working until around 10 a.m. But on the other side of the spectrum, I also saw kids who were worried about sports, and if it was pushed back 30 minutes, they'd still just sleep in another 30 minutes, but then again, go to bed 30 minutes later. And yeah, it was just conflicted. They were worried about sports and about getting started 30 minutes later and therefore ending later.
Thank you.
So anybody want to?
So I think the work that the committee did was really great. It was very cool to be a part of and to really kind of understand the research and the science behind all of this, and it is very valid. And I would encourage people to really kind of dig in and look at what the benefits are for that shift in time start. That said, the bottom line cost, I think, is a big problem. And I think that we have to prioritize things. And if I understand or remember correctly, this would buy us about a half an hour shift later, 25 minutes shift later, with a bottom line cost of about $298,000. I think that's a really difficult. I think that's a difficult thing to take on when we have so many other priorities. And I certainly don't want to, not say that this research is legitimate or anything like that, because I really do believe it in the bottom of my heart. And it makes me sad to say all of this, but I think that's kind of the bottom line for me anyway, is when it comes to priorities, how does this fall? I think that's kind of the big question.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. When this committee started, I was, day one, I want this. I want later start times. I've seen with my own children. I've seen with friends with kids in other districts that already have it, the difference. And the knowledge that my kids are going to be competing with those kids for college entries, on SATs, on all of these things, they're better rested than my kids. And I had already read some of the science, so I wasn't surprised by most of what we read, including the fact that students may say, oh, we'll just stay up later. But the reality is their brains are shutting off at a certain time. It's not a question of, I'm going to binge watch another episode of Stranger Things. It's, this is what time I can legitimately fall asleep. And for most teenagers, that's after 11 o'clock. It's not everybody, obviously. Every kid's different. But we're seeing more of these teenagers that it's just the way their body works. And then when they get to college, suddenly something happens. Puberty's over, and they can get up for that 8 o'clock class. So we're not ruining their lives, and we're not preparing them for a life of work by saying, let's start classes at 8 a.m., right? However, we're in a very unique position, and the problem, the issue, is really the tiering and the buses. And being able to do what we really wanted to do as a committee, and we called it the impossible dream scenario, which was going to be almost $2 million just for busing, to do what we really should do, which would be to have the two to six schools go at the same time. That removes a busing tier. And then there's parity throughout the district. all of the K through 1 kids go at the same time, the 2 through 6, the middle school and high school. We got everybody out by 3:30. It was not a problem. But we don't have $2 million. And if we had $2 million, is this what we would want to spend that money on? I think, Laura, you said that at one of the meetings, and it made me stop and think, what would I spend that money on if I were on the school committee and we suddenly had $2 million? It wouldn't be buses. It really wouldn't be. I'd spend some of it on some sleep education, maybe, and teach students how to take care of themselves, how to eat right, how to go to bed at the right time and prepare themselves. And parents too, how to build good bedtimes from a young age to encourage that, because it is so important that they come to school rested. The scenario that the committee ended up recommending, I don't think anybody really liked it. And when that got out into the public, the reaction was swift and it was immediate and it was painful because we knew it wasn't the best solution. We knew the best solution is too expensive. This is the next best thing. And everybody hated it. I don't think there was really anybody that I saw comment anywhere or speak out in a meeting or write a letter that had anything good to say about this. And I, as somebody who lives in the south part of town, I was very concerned about having Millbury Street Elementary kids getting dismissed at 3:50. Any sort of extracurriculars they do in another town that start at 4, they're not going to make it. So now you're going to have parents picking their kids up at 3:30 to get to dance, karate, gymnastics for 4 o'clock. So that's a problem too. So there's lots of problems with it. I'm really disappointed that we weren't able to come up with a solution that would make everybody happy, would not cost a lot of money, especially this year. Even when we voted as a committee, when should we try to put this in place? We had a couple of different academic years to choose from. It was this academic year, next academic year, the one after. And I favored pushing it off even more because I knew that this year in particular was going to be a challenge this coming year. So I don't see any way out of it. I don't see how we can possibly put this in place for both the reasons of the busing and the finances. Why spend $300,000 we don't have on a scenario we don't want to get a half an hour that the kids themselves are split 50-50 on whether or not they want it? That's where I stand.
So even though the kids say they're not sure if they want it, but yet when you look at the data here, like if you look at all the charts, like how many of them are tired? 63% of them are tired coming into school in the morning. And so I don't think everyone understands the benefit of it. So I still wholly believe it. I think all of us believe that we want to do it. We just, our last committee couldn't figure out a way to do it. So that's why we started the subcommittee, thinking we had more brain power. And even that didn't help. And so we still couldn't come up with an ideal way to make it happen that wouldn't cost tons of money and still have some equity be equitable between all the schools. And I think that was the hardest part, is the 4 tiers. And even the first one that we came up with wasn't so bad, but then you went to AA and they said it had to go pushed out to, that's what pushed it out.
And I bet now, this year, it's probably even more. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I mean, the buses go up every year. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, no, but that's kind of like, we had one scenario, but then when you went to AA, they said, can't do it. And that's what pushed it out to closer to 9:30. That wasn't the original intent of the committee. So I just don't want people to think the committee thought, okay, this is what we wanted to do. It's not, and it wasn't the intent. But I wish we could find a way to make it happen. I still think it's really important for it to happen, but I just also don't know how we can do it.
One of the other things that I heard from some folks was, why don't we just do the flip, which other districts have done with some success? They're structured differently from us. They're not talking about sending kindergartners and first graders to the bus stop at 6:30 in the morning when it's dark. These are districts that, again, have fewer bus tiers. You're talking about a K-6 school being flipped, not a K-1 followed by a 2 to 6. And I think when you're on a working group like this, you learn so much about what makes your district unique and different. And sometimes it's a good different. And I like the way our district is set up. I love the transitioning between the schools. But but I look at Westboro and I think, gosh, if we started this district from scratch, would we have a K-1, a 2-6? Would we do it that way? And I think at one point, Jay, you had said, no, if we were starting over from the very beginning, if we had that luxury and we were building buildings from scratch,
If you were building buildings, right.
exactly, then you're not
That's-
going to set it up this way. It's not
No.
awful, but it does present challenges.
No, you would set it up in a way to have 3 tiers.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. I don't think, Worcester is its own
Well, yeah.
thing. Aside from Worcester, obviously, I don't know of a district locally that has 3 tiers. And so many districts they're basically set up, that have 4. Almost all have 3. And they're also centrally located. If, again, you were starting from scratch, you might take this land and it's kind of like a Sutton. All the
Yeah.
schools are within walking distance, so you don't have to go, and it's nothing like what we have to deal with.
Yeah.
So you're right.
We're special.
We are special.
We are special. Well, and Amy, you kind of hit the head on all my thoughts. We started this very long time ago, as Jen mentioned, and you were one of the main parents who were constantly kind of asking about it to me as like a constituent at the time. And my goal at the end was,
Sorry.
no, not sorry. It's great. Was I wanted to eventually have at least an answer for somebody. It's hard. When I look and when I make difficult decisions on this committee, I always think, what is best for kids? I fundamentally believe later start times are best for high school students. I don't want to do it to the fact that it hurts half the district.
Right.
I also don't fundamentally think, you fund what you value, right? We could certainly make additional cuts and fund the buses for this. We absolutely could. We could do it. Should we do it? I don't think so, because those cuts, I think, would detrimentally hurt. We're already looking at, we're going to get to it shortly. We're already looking at cuts that I think are going to, we've already seen the cuts we made a couple years ago have impacted our children. So every decision we make is an impact. So, again, you absolutely said it. If we were going to start over, we'd start education over so different now, right? SEL shouldn't be an afterthought. I know it no longer is, but it shouldn't have taken us that long to get here. We shouldn't be rushing through math. So many things we've learned, right? I always say, we know better, we should do better. But we can't, we don't have the luxury to restart our education system. And that was really why I wanted to have this discussion tonight, because I didn't want to go through the time, the pain that it would cause, even bringing back the committee, they were so great and so positive and worked so hard, that it's hard to put this to bed, no pun intended, but I think to be able to have an answer, this is why, and I think it really comes down to the 4 tiers. And if there was ever a way, if anybody has I would reopen it. If somebody could come to me with an idea that we haven't thought of and a way that we could fund it so it was equitable and fit into our budget.
Well, someday when we decide we're going to own our own bus company
Right.
and run our, Jay doesn't like that idea.
No,
But,
we brought that up
But,
too,
but
right?
that's something that, some of these districts, they run their own buses, and
Yeah.
that there's pros and cons, obviously.
Yeah, no, and Jay and I sat in his office thinking about, well, what if we could borrow, yeah,
Oh, this has been chopped up for
Yeah.
4
I
years.
sat with Dan
every
and
which
said,
way.
we can save a bus here, here, here,
oh, right.
and no.
Yeah, I went to AA on my, AA. When I went to AA on my field trip, we learned so much. Like you said, Amy, I learned so much about even the timing and it's hard. And that's why I think we're struggling this, because I think we all realize, I do fundamentally believe, I think, you even said, getting kids to bed, but they can't physically fall asleep.
Right.
We're putting them in. But then you said something else, Amy, that I think is interesting. So they're competing with kids but they're also competing with kids that have way more resources than we do.
That's true.
We cut more of those resources. They're falling behind in other ways too. We do a good job here in Grafton, and we, are so appreciative, but we don't have the resources that everybody has. And of course, we have resources that other people don't have. I don't want to sit here and pretend we're,
We can't be all things to all people.
no, it's public school. So we try though, really hard.
But I want to reiterate again, because you've said it a couple of times, and as somebody who was on the committee, I certainly felt like my time was valued and appreciated, and we worked really, really hard, because we all started with the belief that this can happen. And I think it could someday, but that day is not today and it's not next year.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
All
agree
right.
with that.
So we didn't have to take a vote on this because it really wasn't ever I don't know, how did
Right.
you, yeah.
Yeah, there's no motion.
There's no
nothing to
motion or
be
anything,
considered.
but and Amy, I think at one point in a workshop, when we talked about maybe making a decision that you would write a letter, just kind of explaining. I'm happy to start it. I'd love to get input, so I'll send it to Jay and people can edit through if that works. I should have time tomorrow afternoon, so I can at least draft it, but I would love your input on it, just to let the community know, our thoughts. And again, I really want to thank that committee, especially the students on it. They put a lot of heart and soul into it, coming to present to us.
They were very impressive. I really enjoyed working
too.
with them. They were really great, the kids that we had.
But to be fair also, there were parents who weren't for it either.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think we worked as a committee to see it from all sides.
And
And
teachers
some of
as
them
well.
were convinced, but I think most everybody was convinced by the end that this is something that in an ideal world we should do.
Right.
And I think there were people that came into it not sure, and there were students that came into it, with that athletics concern. And we kind of did work that out. There
Yeah.
were some discussions with the athletic department that, there are ways to work that sort of stuff out. Other schools are doing it, some of whom we play now are doing
Yeah.
it. So there are definitely ways to work around that. I do
Yeah.
get their concerns, absolutely.
Yeah, I think everybody, and I think teachers too, and it really came to that lower, the education, the elementary schools, really. They were hit kind of the hardest without getting the benefit,
Yep.
and I think that was the challenge. So I don't know if we have anything else to say. And I'll tell you what, if this had come very close, I would have certainly had this discussion again when Melissa was here, if it looked like people, 2-2 or something. But there's 4 of us, so I think it's a pretty safe. So I think we can move on from later start times. And again, I would really like to thank our later start time committee, their work, and everybody who reached out to us over the past, I think it's been about 3 or 4 years since we started this initiative, and offered all of their feedback to us. We did hear you.
And I'd like to thank Maureen Cohen again
Yeah.
also, because she did a lot to help facilitate a really difficult, discussion.
Yeah,
So,
she really did. So thank you, Maureen. And we miss you. Okay. Whew. Well, thank you guys for that thoughtful discussion too. I appreciate it. I know that this is one of the harder ones we've had to discuss because it impacts everybody in the district, and
well, and I think we
it's
all
not the
want it.
outcome that we want, right? Not the outcome I wanted. Okay. So school committee member reports. Anybody? No? It's been a quiet couple weeks. I went to the select board meeting last Tuesday. I don't really have a report. I just got to hear kind of some of their initial budget reports, and when we get to future agenda planning, I'll update on a couple things. But I think that's it. And Jay left. We could. How about you guys?
I was gonna say I have
Homecoming
GSC,
update. Oh, you do?
yeah.
Do you have an update?
but, we're meeting
You're
again
meeting
Thursday. We've started our benchmarking. I'm meeting with Dan tomorrow.
Ooh, fun.
So, yeah, it's
All
pretty
right.
exciting.
Good.
He's gonna explain it all.
Dennis?
He's looking really
Dan knows
happy.
all. Good. And then I'd love an update.
The
Tyler
juniors
and
are
James?
winning. We're not really gonna talk about it.
I thought it was rigged for the seniors.
Well, I mean, eventually we will
Eventually.
win. It's just currently right now.
Okay.
We are kicking their butt in Penny Wars though, so
Uh-oh.
I'll
very
give my
badly.
junior all of my pennies.
And what do you tell us again? Where the money goes to? What
this year we're doing the food bank. So we're collecting.
Oh.
There's a can drive as well as the Penny Wars. So I think the Penny Wars is up to like $151 on the. I guess today's the second day, and then the can drive's been running for 4 days. And I saw the collection. There's a lot of food. I couldn't quantify it, but we're
Does
doing
it have
a lot.
to be cans? Is
Not
it-
cans. It can be anything, any food. Just call it the can drive.
Oh,
But
I'm
you
just-
can do
yeah.
so like cans obviously, but you can bring in other. I don't really know how to, but like boxes of food as well.
Could you do like toiletries and things like that as well?
You might. I
Do
don't
you
know
know?
for sure.
I know that that's usually a.
I believe so. I know.
a
I feel like I've seen them in there. I don't.
Yeah.
Don't completely quote that on me, but
I bet it's good. Yeah. And toilet paper. Did you know that's the #1 need?
Yeah.
Because your SNAP benefits
Yeah,
don't cover it.
Hmm.
It's crazy. Isn't that crazy?
And
No.
also congratulations on all of your hard work of advocate, not yours, but the student body of advocating and getting the dance back, so congrats.
Yep.
Yeah, I was starting to feel like Footloose.
Yeah, I was
out
just
there.
gonna say, if somebody does not request Footloose at the dance, I'll be very disappointed.
They don't know what that
Yeah,
is.
they
know
sold,
what
I
Footloose
think
is.
600,
Just did
I think so. That's the number.
about
That's the number
600
I heard.
tickets. That's pretty impressive.
Nice,
Wait,
that's
how many?
great.
600, I
600.
think, compared to I think 140 for the
Oh, yeah,
dance 2
600.
weeks ago.
600 tickets?
I think so.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's the
Do we
number I
even
heard.
fit that many?
Yeah, it's going to be in the gym.
Nice.
And we'll put the.
I'll be
yeah,
in the
yeah,
lobby
we'll fit.
selling refreshments if
All right.
anybody wants to come say hi.
Probably a good place to be.
But it is a good example of the students kind of coming together and articulating what they want and then working to make sure that it happens. So congratulations, that was good.
Just police each other.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, just be safe. Put my mother hat on. But have a good time. Any
Make good
other-
choices.
Make good choices. My mom always said, don't do anything stupid. So any other updates?
Participation's been very good.
Yeah.
A lot of people came in
Yeah.
today dressed up.
Nice. For Tacky Tourist Day, is
Yeah.
that today?
Yeah.
What's
Tomorrow's
tomorrow?
Grafton Pride Day. Thursday's Decades Day, and then Class Color Day, obviously Friday.
Right.
Who decides the themes? I'm just curious.
Student Council.
It is student council. See that, Ainsley? I told you.
Wow. Good. All right, any other updates?
I don't think, you mentioned Oktoberfest,
I did, but you
right?
can mention it again.
The 19th of October, 10 to 3 o'clock, South Grafton Elementary School. Talked about the internship. Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
Okay, great.
Do you have enough volunteers for the Oktoberfest?
Oh, all right.
No. Oh, no.
So maybe
So
just.
I'll
you
put
want-
something in my
Okay.
newsletter
Yeah.
Thursday. And Laura, I think I caught it. The committee's going to have something on later start time?
Yes, we need it by Friday.
Thursday would be ideal, but I'll deal with Friday if need be.
Okay, so I'll definitely get something out to you tomorrow, Jay, then if you could
Okay.
circulate it to the committee, and if people could provide you with any of their updates, then we can get it final. I mean, it'll be short and simple and grateful, I guess, I mean,
If this gets too dark, tell me. The lights tend to,
are you going, to the budget?
oh, am I not?
We can move it up, we might as well move it
Move it
up.
up. It's
What am I
fine.
skipping?
Future agenda planning and approval of minutes,
Superintendent's report.
he just gave
District
it,
update. Oh,
yeah,
you did?
yeah, it was quick, we said we already covered everything.
Oh, okay.
We can certainly wait. I wasn't trying
No,
to
I
jump
think
the
we're,
gun.
what did we say? It's supposed to be, I think we're fine. I mean, it's supposed to be at 8:30, we're a little ahead, but you can always watch it on demand.
Okay.
Go ahead, you ready?
Sure. All right, so this is our second meeting that we're focusing on the budget, just to I guess, catch everybody up what we're trying to do this year, knowing that we're gonna have a tough budget year, obviously. FY '21, we've had a lot of discussion over the past 6 months, 7 months about state funding, and our concerns about FY not only '21, but '22 and beyond. So we've been trying to, as you know, give our best thinking about the FY '21 budget, but rather than focus on that for 6 months, get to sometime midwinter, even late winter, and say, oh my gosh, we're in trouble not only this year, but in the future, start to frame that discussion much earlier. That's why we're having a bit of a different tact this year in having the discussion now. Here we are in mid-October. So this is ideally going to be discussion-based. Again, at the last meeting, we talked about the snapshots for FY '21 through, I think it was '26, where we gave, again, our best thinking that we built on. We started last year, we updated it for this year. I handed out 2 things. One is the very basic snapshot for FY '21 and our expectations in terms of spending. And then on the spreadsheet that's got the yellow, the blue, and the pink, Dan and I will speak to that. That's a product of what we knew to be the school department needs in our projections. And since we last met, Dan and I sat down with Town Administrator Tim McInerney and Rebecca Meekins. And we received numbers from them in terms of their projections in terms of funding or revenue for the schools from FY '21 through FY '27. We collaborated, built this one document here, and that's what I'll speak to tonight. You're going to hear both Dan and I talk about the Student Opportunity Act. I'm sure you've read a lot about it in the paper. You can't kind of miss it in the news. That act, maybe 6 months ago, was the Promise Act. It's basically looking to, that title is an effort to change and update the Chapter 70 funding for schools. We have for years known it's been inadequate. We had the Foundation Budget Review Commission came out with all these recommendations. How many years ago was that?
I think 4 or 5.
4 or 5 years ago. So since then, we've all been talking about it. But now we're starting to get hard numbers to come out with it. We're getting different iterations of it. We sat down with David Meridian, looked at the Senate bill. There's a House bill. There are just different versions. We were hopeful for the last couple of years, and we've spoken very openly about it, Dan and I, that whatever came out, we knew it wouldn't really hit in terms of the benefit wouldn't really hit Grafton for a few years, and we spoke to that. We anticipated needing some sort of bridge, either to make reductions or to look for an override, to create a bridge from basically today until when that money came in and we finally had the state funding that we needed. And unfortunately, with every iteration that Dan and I have looked at and examined, it right now looks like a bridge to nowhere. There's really, and we'll speak to that, but that money, we don't see a scenario whereby between FY21 and FY27, we'd have those monies available to make a significant difference. And we'll speak to that tonight. So what I want to talk about, and again, and I'm going to try to keep this as basic as possible. We have a fundamental multi-year problem ahead of us. We want to keep what we have, and that's a high-quality school system. We've got very strong scores, well-rounded students who are well-supported, a great staff who we've invested a lot in terms of professional development that Tracy's talked about. We offer a wide range of programming, activities from sports to robotics. I mean, we always wish we could do more, but we have a high-quality school system. And I've consistently argued for a decade that it's the best return on investment in the state of Massachusetts. Since I've been here, and it's almost 10 years, and this precedes me, we've never been outside of the bottom 3% in terms of state funding for the district. So it's pretty amazing that on a very limited amount of funding, we do so well. It's great. We've been able to kind of ride that fine line. That's terrific. The reality is we have inadequate town revenue. We just simply do. And we have inadequate state funding. Those two things are crippling. There's no question about that. In terms of the basic solution, you can come up with other solutions, but I would argue the two main options for us when we look at a multi-year problem is we can either reduce school spending and make reductions. And again, I've said it 1,000 times, we're a personnel-based organization. 80% of our spending goes towards personnel. 20% is other stuff. So once you cut the other stuff, assuming we're still going to have buses, we're going to have heat in the building, all that stuff. If you just cut supplies, say, you're not cutting that year after year to make up the gap that I'm going to talk about tonight. It's when we talk about reductions, that's got to be people. It just fundamentally, year after year, it has to be. If we had a gap of 200,000 this year, I could say we wouldn't have to cut a person necessarily. We could cut capital items, decrease the heat, whatever. We could probably do it. Smaller amount of money for 1 year. When it's year after year in a big number, that's just not possible. So that's one option. And or we increase town revenue. And that quite simply is an override. We've done it before. We're going to have to at least consider it. And if say it went to the ballot and it doesn't go through, the only other option is those reductions. So in terms of historical increases, this is what we've received in terms of an annual increase over the past 8 years. FY14, that was that 7.7, that's when we had the override. And we had set that figure at 5.25%. That gets us to level service, basically, plus a little bit. For if everything breaks right, we can make some improvements. That number has served us incredibly well. In a very general sense, it's about 4% of that 5.25, and this has held true consistently, 4% towards personnel, and the other 1.25 would be towards improvement. So it could be some additional staff members, It could be if we took on a new math program, say. Anything we wanted to improve would be out of that 1.25. You can see that the hope was we would commit to that for 5 years and stretch it as far as we could, and we continue to try to stretch it. We had 2 years where things didn't go well, of no fault of anybody's but I say the town as a whole, and in terms of insurance, and we received 4.17 one year and 4.5 last year. We made some adjustments and reductions, and we made it work, and the town schools worked with the municipal side, and we made it work. You can see in FY14 we had more, and we were able to add programming, which was great. Added like the curriculum coordinators, that type of thing. And then when we had to reduce in FY17, we had to get rid of those 2 positions, which Tracy talked to earlier today. So there's that normal ebb and flow. So in the blue, that's what I just showed you, that's this. And then from FY21 in the green, FY21 to 27, we have, instead of, those are what we've defined as our level service needs for those 7 years. What we didn't do this year, which I think was great, that we've done sometimes in the past, and it's always well-intentioned, that if we had the funds, what would we do? Like, what do we really want to be better than we are now? And so, in a given year, we come out with, we need 7% increase. Most districts actually kind of approach it that way, and then reality comes, and over 6 months, you end up knocking the number down and meeting somewhere in the middle. We very purposefully, with the blessing of the committee, didn't do that this year. We've got, those numbers are level service. We have all the snapshots of exactly what they'd include. FY21 is a little higher than the others, mainly because we did put some positions in there. We each year put in a couple special ed positions because that's how historically we've trended. But in terms of improvement, we've built in those 2 coordinator positions. Instead of going outside for those coordinators, we built in $57,000 for each of those positions. So one STEM really focused on math and the other humanities. And we've decided we can do it more cost effectively by hiring somebody internally, and then we'd be hiring for that teacher at that master's 3 or 4 rate at $57,000. And the third position that we would add to make us better is that guidance counselor at the elementary level, which we don't have a single one now, and as far as I know, we never have. I don't know of any district that doesn't have numerous people in that position. We don't have one. So ideally, that would be a nice add for us, but that's why it's a little bit above in FY21. So here's where the problem comes in. That's what we need, and I'm committed to that's what we actually need. In the yellow, so the green hasn't changed in terms of the overall number. In the yellow, it looks like off green, that's what is reflected here in terms of what, in terms of town revenue, would be allocated to the schools. And if I lose you, just tell me. So that's obviously a problem for us, and it's not a one-year problem. Most districts, if you just have to take a real hit, and we have historically here, you take a real hit 1 year, that's terrible, but it's 1 year, and hopefully you bounce back that next year and in subsequent years. This obviously, the high is 3.7 being FY21. In a few years, you drop down to 2%, and that levels out. The thinking is in FY28, 29, et cetera, that we'd be counting on about 2%. So in terms of reductions, and this is the percentages, I'll get to the actual numbers momentarily, but that red is the gap, the funding gap that's left. That makes sense? All right. So in terms of hard numbers, the gap's on the bottom. It ranges from a low of, and this is for the next 7 years, a low of 622 and a high in FY27 of just over $1.1 million. If we looked at it in terms of a 5-year issue, you're looking at a $3.49 million issue. If you're looking at it as a 7-year issue, $5.88 million. Now, the unfortunate, there's a bunch of things that are unfortunate about this, but in the spreadsheet that we created and handed out, that includes, it's already built into these numbers, the expected revenue that we bring in through the Student Opportunity Act. Dan has an unbelievable wealth of knowledge about Chapter 70, about different pieces of that act. We don't know, nobody here and nobody that I know of in the state knows how that act is actually going to play out in terms of what passes, what doesn't, what numbers. There are two components that we can talk to, and if we can go into depth if you like in just a few minutes. One is the actual Chapter 70 number, and you'd see that that was what we were hoping would come in. You know, it might be in FY25, but we'd bring in $500,000, $1 million, $1.5 million the year after. We were hoping for that kind of windfall. Right now, it's looking like we would bring in, and again, it's built in, about $50,000 annually, 24, 25, and 26, and then $75,000 in 27. That doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about 0.25% of our overall budget. That's not going to move the needle at all. The other component that could help us, much more so than the straight Chapter 70 increase, would be around circuit breaker. I won't dive into it too deeply this second, but right now, there's a formula that we can use for out-of-district tuitions for students with special needs who go out of district. We get a certain percentage of those monies back. Historically, transportation, which is a big number, is not tied to that circuit breaker reimbursement. In the Student Opportunity Act, it is included. So you can see on that spreadsheet in FY22, we could bring in an additional $115,000, $130,000 the year after, $137,000. So again, not deal breakers. That money, if it comes to become reality, that doesn't save the day for us. It helps. Every bit helps. No question about it. But you can see that's not. Oh, we're all set now. You're talking $130,000, $140,000 in additional monies. So.
Can I ask you a quick question?
You can ask anything you like.
Why does that drop off so drastically in 26 and 27?
Yeah, it's a phased-in program where it starts with you get 25%, then up to 50%, 75%, and 100%. So once we're at 100%, there'll be basically an inflationary adjustment in there, but that's all you're getting in additional monies.
Got it.
That's at 100. So when we look at this projected gap, and that,
Can I ask you
Yep,
real
of
quick
course
before you
you
go to that? And also, why does our budget kind of stabilize out in 23 through 27 at the 4.2, 4.2?
yep,
I know
ideally,
there was
if
a
we have
reason.
those positions and we're
Right.
level service, we're not looking at, right now.
Oh, 'cause we
the
wouldn't be
positions
looking at
that we're
adding.
adding in are positions that were cut a few years ago.
Right, okay.
Ideally, those are added, and then we're not adding above and beyond that. Are things gonna come up? I'm sure, but they most likely have to be done at the cost of something else.
Right,
This
okay.
is, we'd be basically whole at that point.
Thanks.
So the town, I just wanted to go over a few variables in here. I'll jump to the second one because it ties to just what you asked, Laura. In terms of the school department needs, I wanted just to make sure that we're clear about the reality of reductions. Like, these numbers don't stay stagnant. If we have to cut $800,000, we're going to obviously cut, let's say, $500,000 in personnel. Next year, the number in terms of our need that's on this board here, that need in 22, I would assume that we may just have to, we're going to end up, ideally, adding those people back or some positions back. Does that make sense? So it's kind of the snowball effect.
Right.
If you have to make huge cuts for 3 years, you're going to spend years trying to get
Catch up.
those positions back. You
Which
just
is what
are-
we're kind of doing with the coordinator
that's
positions that got
100
cut.
That was my next thing. That's 100% what we're doing. If we had more money, we would probably be trying to add the second assistant principal from Millbury Street School. we could come up with, there is a list to be had. But right now, those would take priority. So that's the tough part. In the districts where they've had to make years of cuts, they're asking for a great deal of money, not just to get through that next year with what they currently have, but to get back to whole. So in the town funding projections, they took out, Tim and Becca, I don't want to speak for them, but they were great when we met. They shared this document, and we kind of merged the two. So they were terrific. They have built in, or they took out the UPS projections that you might remember from, I think it was last October. Took those out, and they've built in projections for marijuana sales in a year. I think it was 350,000 a year. So those are speculative too, just like on kind of our side, if you will. We're using our best thinking about the Student Opportunity Act, which at best I think would go through in some iteration around Thanksgiving. They're doing the same thing. They're just being open that they built those monies in. So both are kind of up in the air. We talked about the Student Opportunity Act. We can talk about that more if need be. A huge variable for us every single year is out of district tuitions and the corresponding out of district transportation costs. Right now, we're trending probably the best we've ever trended in 9 years in terms of out of district tuitions. But you can remember just a couple of years ago, it went the other way. In one spring, I think it was like 400,000. It just in terms of move-ins for students, and you just have to find that money. We do have, well, I'll go into that now. In terms of that reduced spending and revenue generation, this is probably just wishful thinking, but my hope is that as we go through the budget process, well, of course, we're going to talk about everything, all of our lines, all the stuff that we normally talk about, but historically, we spend less time talking about this big picture and this multi-year problem than we do on kind of the smaller things, which I always talk about being like the red herrings. So we've got that zero-based budgeting. I don't think you'll find a human who studies any one budget more than Dan Gale does, day in, day out, looking for efficiencies, whatever we can do to do the very best we can, being in that bottom 3% in the state. And I think, a large part of the credit goes to Dan for making that work, and we've been able to pull it off. But I'm trying to say this very politely. While we're going to talk about these things, I think it's just critical that we keep focusing on that big picture. In terms of things that we've done with the town, we created that stabilization account. It was the year we got into or right after we got into the jam with a sudden increase in out-of-district tuitions. So we've got that account set up. It's about $200,000. That would cover anywhere from 1 to 3 tuitions if they do come up. So it's something, but again, it's not going to save the day. We've had a very strong partnership with the municipal side, if you will. One example being that SRO grant that we wrote with Chief Crapo. For the last 2 years, we had our SRO, Officer Alves, his salary paid through this grant entirely. I mean, that's fantastic. A lot of people bring up grants. They bring up the things that just everybody brings up, and I get it. And it's great, and it's my job to talk about it, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions, but you can go on the DESE website and look at grants. The great majority are going to be for districts that are not Grafton. They are going to be the cities and those who desperately need help, even more so than we do. So it's all good, and it's done in a very just manner, but we don't qualify for the great majority. We've developed a fantastic school choice program. That program brings in every year just over $500,000 that we can pay salaries. We pay a whole host of things out of our school choice program that offsets. Just since we've started, I don't know, that was maybe 6 years ago, we've brought in over $2 million that otherwise we wouldn't have things, or it would, again, fall back on the town. We've maxed out solar And we continue to push that our only limitation is what the substation can withstand. And right now, we think we can even now expand to Millbury Street. We're ready to go. We're all set with the solar company. Like, everything's set. The roof's all set. Can the substation handle it? So we've maxed that out. Fees. We're going to talk about fees at the next meeting. And that's a great discussion to have. But again, if you look at sports fees, let's say that brings in $60,000. If we did sports fees, you're talking about less than 1/4% of our budget. Fees of any kind are not going to save the day for us. There's just no way. So I hope we can just stay focused on the fact that we've got a $3.5 million 5-year problem and is it not 4? Yeah, is it 4.6 or 5.8?
6 is
It says 5.8.
through FY '26.
Yeah, sorry, I was off by a year. $5.8 million 7-year problem, which is obviously huge for us. How about questions?
So that 2%, like, so those are the numbers from Tim and Rebecca, like that,
Yep.
they feel that's everything they can give us
That's right.
projected.
Yep.
Fantastic.
And it goes back to that, I mean, gosh, I've shown you this so many times, but
Only because
you
we,
remember this on the far right. We don't have enough revenue townwide.
right,
And we don't qualify for enough state aid, and you get stuck in this no man's land, and that's why we're so far we don't benefit from either. And that's how you get in that bottom 3%. The towns who are kind of worse off financially, they qualify for a significant greater amount in terms of state aid, and those wealthier towns are far exceeding the required school spending amount. So most districts in the state exceed or go over the required school spending, and we do. We're 115%. Compare that, I mean, look at Westboro. I don't think that's going to shock anybody here, but they have a significantly bigger budget. Their budget's bigger than our town budget, spending 153%. I mean, so you can see, we're stuck. It's not anybody's fault, but it's the reality, and I think it's not a presentation I enjoy giving, but I think it's important for us to lay out what we foresee in the future.
Are we still 9th from the bottom?
They don't
in
come out with that.
per
We
pupil?
were, the numbers are still from,
Right.
it trails, but they don't come out until like December or January, but it's impossible for us. We certainly can't move up. The only way we move up is a district doesn't have an override pass. They kind of fall apart, and they bump us up.
If I remember right, we were as low as 5th from the bottom, and then
We
we
were
went
once,
to 9th, and then 13th
We were
sticks in my
we were
mind.
dead last.
Yeah.
in
Oh,
the
that's right. Yeah,
entire
we
state
were.
for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's on behalf of many people, not just the school district. We made it work.
Yeah.
But
we also moved up to 9th with the override.
we've been holding on
That's
for
what-
money
Yes,
that's just not coming from the state. And could that change? Could it radically change in the next month? I guess. I wouldn't bet a single cent on that. But there's not one version that we've seen, and we've just run the numbers and run the numbers. We just don't benefit. Do you want to talk about this stuff at all?
Yeah.
For just a second, we'll go over basically what you're asking about.
Yeah, so I like the Chapter 70 reform. It's been in the news for several years now. About a year ago, there was some projections came out that actually showed Grafton could receive up to like $1 million more in Chapter 78. Those projections were based on a 4-year implementation that would have started back in FY19, I believe. So it would have been implemented quicker. The money would have, Chapter 70 would have rose quicker, and that's why it would have been a bigger benefit to us. This is now spread out over 7 years, and it's a couple of years later. And when they're talking about how you would do versus like if the formula wasn't changed, every year out that you go further, we would have had an increase anyway, so the changes have less effect. But Grafton's actually benefits on the projections. There were some projections came out last week, which are still need to be kind of ironed out. But in those projections, Grafton did one of the worst in the state, basically. And our foundation aid would actually go down over the next 7 years. So we'd get no assistance from the changes being made to the foundation budget. So I wanted to show you tell you a little bit about this second provision in the Student Opportunity Act. Would basically say if the foundation budget formula isn't going to help you, we have this other option called the minimum aid adjustment. So this line, the bottom line, is Chapter 78 if we just got $30 per pupil increase over the next 7 years. But the estimates that came out last week had Grafton getting an additional $226,000, and that was due to the provision called minimum aid adjustment, which basically says if you take away any changes to Chapter 70, if we just increased you based on an assumed inflation rate, how would you do in that scenario? And in that scenario, we would get an extra $226,000. That scenario is dependent on an assumed inflation rate. So if inflation was lower than what they assumed, we would get less. If it was higher, we would get more. But that seems to be the provision that is our only hope to getting more Chapter 78 than,
And that's over 7 years.
yeah.
That was gonna be the
that's
next
over 7
question.
years. And the
That total
assumption,
number is over 7 years?
yeah, so
226.
that's from, the kind of the line starts at FY20 and goes to FY27. And I was on the phone yesterday with the state, and that they're assuming that 226 would come in FY26, FY27. Like, we'd see no benefit until FY26. So this is just in number form, showing we have 11,108,000 in FY20 of state aid, and if you just increased it by $30 per pupil per year, we'd go up by $653,000 in aid. And the minimum aid adjustment scenario would go up by $879,000 for an increase of 226. So we're kind of less hopeful on the Chapter 70 reform side of it. There is another provision that I wanted to touch on, which Jay already touched on. The circuit breaker, they're considering adding, reimbursing us for transportation for transporting students out of district to their placements. So for information on that, we spend around $600,000 a year to transport students out of district to their placements. And the way that I was told that it's going to work is that not all of that money would be 100% reimbursable, claimable the first year. They would phase it in, so they would say 25% of whatever you're spending that you could put in a claim for. So in the first year, if it was $615,000, we could claim $153,000 of that. And then the circuit breaker calculation reimbursement, they give anywhere between 65 to 75% reimbursement on what you can claim. So if we claimed 153 and we got 75% reimbursement, we would get an additional revenue of 115,000 in FY22. This part of the law gets implemented right away and phased in over 4 years. So we see additional revenue from this sooner than what we would see on any Chapter 70 increase. These, I was just talking to Senator Moore's office today about these numbers. They're supposed to try to get back to me in the next couple days to try to see what their projections show, how accurate. These are my best guess on how it would work out. We're also talking to David Meridian's office and Desi, who kind of works with the governor to implement this law. So we're hoping to have more information and probably more accurate numbers in the next either couple weeks, possibly into the middle of November, because the House still hasn't reviewed the Student Opportunity Act. So Senate's making amendments, then it has to go through the House. So we still have a few weeks until you know, we're hoping to get some more accurate information out of the state on what our projections should be. But we just wanted to give you a little bit of information about that. And these numbers that we gave you before, were the gap between this, what we think we need and the town can afford, takes these numbers into account. And so with all that, still looking at, you know, 3 to 5 million over the next, you know, 5 or 7 years of a gap.
It's perfect.
So I don't know if you have any more questions about the Student Opportunity Act. I am gonna be talking with, you know, the people from the state, so I can get some more answers, anything that you have.
So I was gonna bring this up in correspondence, but it's kind of a good, I forwarded you the information that I had reached out to Senator Moore, and his office sent an email this afternoon, kind of explaining it a little bit more. I know, Dan, you had additional questions, which you just said. And we also got a letter, I think Jay circulated it, from Representative Meridian asking for our feedback for it. So I know what my feedback is that it really, I'll say it. What did you say? You're trying to say it in a polite way?
I
It,
don't know what I said.
it doesn't help us. I mean, I think that it would be very appropriate for everybody to reach out and let him know, you know, that this isn't, something that's gonna help Grafton. I recognize, as a public school advocate, which I truly believe, you know, we are, I think this bill does help, other people.
Yep.
And if I was not on this committee, I would be, you know, this is a once in a lifetime. This legislation has been going on since, you know, before I even got on this committee, and they haven't made significant changes, I think, since I was in high school. So I feel like, you know, we have been advocating. I saw something, you know, I have been in communication with our reps, MASC, you know, everybody's been advocating for this for a while. This kind of threw me for a loop. This, the Opportunity Act was different than the promise, different than the foundation. I mean, it definitely kind of threw me when I read through the numbers that we were getting so less. So I know on my behalf, you know, I'm definitely going to reach out to Representative Meridian and let him know, you know, I mean, I don't know how much he can help, but they haven't voted yet, that this isn't good enough for me. This isn't good enough for
Do we know when their
Grafton.
vote is?
They weren't voting because there's the holiday tonight,
We
so
don't
happy
know.
holidays.
I
but
asked when,
Yeah.
Next week is what I read.
I read, yeah, it's coming up soon.
Yeah. Is it
Yeah,
better
but
for
even-
something like that? I'm sorry, Dan, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I think that when we met with
Were you
David
gonna say
Meridian
just one
last week, I think he said it hasn't come to them yet as of last week. He thought maybe this week or next week.
Right.
But one thing David Meridian said was, so since the Chapter 70 formula is not going to be very beneficial to Grafton, and will be a minimum aid district getting like the $30 per pupil each year, so a lot of Senator Moore advocated for that $30 to go up to $50, but that did not pass as an amendment in the Senate. Senator Meridian is going to try to, a smaller amount, but try to get it up from $30. So that's kind of like the one part that is kind of the only way for us to get a little bit more money in these first few years, is if that minimum aid, I mean, it's not gonna help a lot, you know, if we get
Right.
$10 more per pupil, gets us 30 grand. So either way, we're not anticipating anything that's gonna help us with the big gap that we have.
Can you explain what makes us minimum aid?
Yeah, so, the foundation budget calculates how much the town can afford and how much the state can afford to kind of cover the full, calculated cost that towns should spend on their education. So, this is kind of, you know, we could do that, we could do the slide here.
I like when you fill out your FAFSA and they say you can afford $55,000 for college as your parent contribution, and you say,
Mhm.
what?
Yeah, so
Yep.
so the state has a formula calculates a foundation budget on how much they think that town should spend on education. It takes into account the amount of students and the demographics of the students. It gives additional money for low-income students, also English language learners, and additional money for special education students. So once they come up with that foundation budget amount, Then they decide how much can the town afford of that. So that's called the town contribution. It's also called required local contribution. So that's also a complex formula that involves the value of the property in the town and the income of the residents. So right now that comes out to around 67%. That the state says that Grafton can afford to cover the foundation budget. So then the rest of that, the state comes in to fund. So the state portion under that formula says that we should get around 10 million, but we're already getting 11 million in state aid. Because we became minimum aid back in FY14, and the formula said we should go down, we should get less aid, but there's a provision in the law that says we can't go down, so we get that minimum $30 per pupil every year. So every time, the formula is saying we should getting less, but we continually get that extra $90,000, $30 per pupil. So there's a gap between what we are getting and what the foundation budget formula says we should get in state aid. So we're just going to continue to get that minimum aid, and especially from the numbers that came out last week, it says that we're never going to catch up. The foundation budget is never going to say that we should get more than we're getting now. There's that minimum aid adjustment based on inflation that could help us, but just on this formula alone, we would never catch up, and we would always be a minimum aid district.
And that's what we were hoping for years, that it would be readjusted, and we would, after maybe 3 years, we'd come out of minimum aid and would, take off and have money. But it's definitely not the case.
But we're not alone. It's not just Grafton, right? This is like affecting other towns like Grafton.
Yeah, there are large, majority of districts in the state are minimum aid. Some kind of come out of minimum aid each year. This formula, I'm not really sure how it's going to affect other towns in terms of if they're going to be out of minimum aid, or some towns are actually going to go into minimum aid, but I can't really speak too much on the other towns. But
So the question I was going to ask was, would it be better for us to write individually, or would it be better to have a letter from the committee,
I mean,
or both?
I mean, we definitely could do a formal letter, for sure. I mean, he did ask, I can't remember exactly what he said.
Yeah, he did ask for just
Yeah.
one. Well, he asked for one.
He asked for one, so I'm happy to do that quickly. That's easy. But I guess that was more of a cry to our viewers at home,
Yep.
I guess, as well,
Yeah.
that they could reach out to their state rep and let them know, that this is a bill that isn't going to help Grafton. I mean, that's kind of was my thought. But you're right, yeah. I mean, I can do an official one, just,
I think it's great that Senator Moore offered the amendment. I'm disappointed that didn't pass, because it would have been something. It wouldn't have
Yeah.
been the whole smash, but it would have been something.
and the original Foundation Budget Review Committee wanted 100. That's what they recommended.
Right.
And obviously you recommend and you go down, and I know they have so many things on their plate, and, but that's really, I mean, it's just disappointing.
And it's taken so long to get to this point. It's so unlikely that they're going to revisit this in the next 5 years.
To affect
Right. This
anybody
is gonna
whose
be-
children who are
Yeah.
in school now, or even, I mean, no, like I said, it was high school when they passed, when I was in high school. It's, yeah. Okay. Do we have any other questions? So,
We'll definitely be back in 2
Yeah.
weeks.
yeah, what are your thoughts on what are we gonna start looking at? What are your thoughts for what comes next, budget presentation wise? And I'll
At
tell you.
some point, whether it's in 2 weeks or in 4 weeks, we've got to circle back to FY21
Yeah.
and figure out if that 804 in terms of reductions, what does that look
What
like?
does that look like? Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's going to be fairly nebulous. Well, we'll have some votes. It won't all be done. Well, I think we asked Representative Meridian, he was hopeful that it would be completed one way or the other by Thanksgiving. So rather than, well, we can touch on any of this, and if you guys have questions that come up either tonight or anytime between now and the next meeting, we can work on getting more information. That's pretty easy, but while things are somewhat nebulous, I think we should circle back to 21.
Sure.
And take a look at what that 804 looks like.
Maybe it was already answered. So when it went from 4.5 down to 2.8, was that all just because of the UPS? Like what we're getting from the town?
Oh, I couldn't say, just because I don't remember. We didn't have, at least I don't recall, tell me if I'm wrong, Dan, an in-depth discussion about really what made up those numbers on the
Right,
municipal side. I talked about,
only
they were
because
very
the
forthcoming when
original
UPS came
numbers
off.
were more.
Correct.
And
Yep,
then-
yep. The UPS came off more and marijuana funding was built in. And I think that was for next year, but again, I can find out for sure and get more information, but they were very forthcoming and they were great to work with.
Is there any more, like, information from this that we'd want somebody, Dan or Jay, to go into depth next time too, that they can, I know Dan can definitely dig more into chapter 70 or anything that you think you want to know more about?
I wanted to know more about grants, but he already answered that, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
one of those, and it's
Because I
not
think
bad
when
that
I
you
was
bring it
looking
up.
at, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Okay.
when you're looking back at, you go back to your chart of all the towns, back one.
Yeah,
So,
so those
know,
are all entitlement grants.
okay, because I'm looking like Oxford has like, a decent amount of grant. Halston, so I'm just compared to Grafton, so I was
So,
wondering what theirs
Like,
would
they
be.
may qualify for some, a greater, say, Title I funding.
Right.
I can easily break these down, they're all in the book, but those, every, I don't know, what is it, June, July. The allotment comes out, and that's what you have, and you
Right.
adjust accordingly, but those aren't, well, there's a lot of work in terms of processing, we don't apply for it. Like
Right.
most people think of a grant, like you write a really convincing grant and apply and just hope for the best. You're going to get that every year. That's like guaranteed funding. What's not guaranteed is the number can go up and down.
Right,
And then those are different than, like, we have gotten some grants, like the one we could do our sidewalks and we
Yeah.
got the
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
lighting
No,
and
anything we
we got the window grant.
Yep,
no, I
yep.
was just
You
looking
know.
at the percentage-wise for
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
certain towns, like they have more grants than
That's-
Grafton.
that's
but when I look
typically
at
gonna be
Halston, Ashland, yeah.
Those who economically have greater need, almost always.
And they also probably have grant writers.
Well, not for the entitlement grants.
entitlement. No?
You don't, no, that's just a disbursement. We have to fill out paperwork and do, well,
Yeah.
I say we liberally, Tracy has to do
Thank you.
this headache-inducing paperwork, but all summer, it's a real pain. But the actual amount is just set. You can look in the DESI website, it comes out on one day, these are the grants, this is what you get. They're not competitive.
Okay. No, that was what I was wondering more about.
And not to call you both out, but I know a lot of this is new too, so if there's more information
yeah.
to.
Well, just one point I wanted to add is that you talked about the school choice.
Yep.
And somebody watching this might say, oh, well, let's just increase school choice, and we can't do
Right,
that
right,
either.
right.
I mean, we have to take care of our own, and we have to keep the class sizes small, and, $500,000 sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
But any more than that, you've done a great job of balancing each grade and figuring out where you've got seats that you can give away and where you don't.
We're pretty much
really-
maxed out, and it was all about economy of scale and
Right.
taking advantage of that where we had it in different pockets. Other than every year, obviously, we graduate students and bring them in now kindergarten. For the most part, unless somebody moves out, we don't have available seats for that. My worry, one of my many worries would be, obviously, if we're reducing year after year, this is what happens. You do this year after year, you have larger class sizes, a district
Right.
just isn't performing as well. Well, not a shocker. The kids who are getting driven to and from school every day from 2 towns over, they're not staying. They're either going back to their home school or they're going to a district that's not in distress. So obviously that happens, and guess what? That's less money that we have in a greater hole. That's what happens.
I don't remember if this was in Senator Moore's letter or in Representative Moradian's, but there was something about that our enrollments are projected to decline over the next few years. And I guess my question would be, that may be true, but
That's not
expenses
it's
still
not
go up.
really, necessarily.
well, that's,
I'm
and
not
I was
saying
thinking
it's
about
not
that.
true, but if you I think it was Senator Moore's, and they
Okay.
just had a stat, I think it was down by 1%. That's
Yeah.
30 kids for us. We've had a shift of 30 kids just since the start of school, probably.
Yeah.
We do expect, and we're having, not because of this discussion, but we've already contracted to have NESDEC back because we want to do another look for the next 10 years. But we expect enrollment to be stable.
Okay.
And that's what we predicted. We're going to have fluxes of 1%, one way or the other, absolutely. But the way it was stated in the letter was like it was substantial. But then it does say 1%.
Okay.
Again, that's not keeping me up at night.
And expenses are increasing by more than 1%
Yeah,
a
yeah,
year,
yeah.
so
It's-
it offsets.
Talk about a red herring. That's kind of one of those.
Right.
And NESDEC does a great job. They look at birth rates. They do a real in-depth dive, and they were fantastic for us, maybe 10 years ago. So they're coming out this year.
And they'll look at projects in
Yeah,
progress,
they
like
do- they-
developments and stuff that are,
100%.
okay, cool,
They're fantastic.
good.
They'll map it out through 2035.
It seems far away, but it's not.
Yeah, it's really not.
Well, thank you. Thanks for
Yeah.
putting this together. It's very, I think, comprehensive, which is good. And I know we're gonna obviously talk about it a lot more. But if you do come up with more questions that you want Jay and Dan to address, let them know over the next week so they have time to prepare. And, Jay, this wasn't in our book, right? This will be available on the
Handout?
website, this presentation?
Yep, it would be with all the materials.
Great, I appreciate that. Thank you both. Thanks, Dan, too. I know you've been, I will say, I've had a lot of online discussions with some of the, leaders in the greater education, and every one of them had said, well, we talked to Dan Gale, and I also heard a couple of really positive shout-outs about our, budget book, and I want to thank you both, for doing that. Yeah, and you guys are both welcome to go. James, you're always, 9:00, feel free to head out. School always comes first, but we're delighted to have you. It's not always this, no. I hate to have you end on this tonight, but we'll look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks. Have fun at the dance.
Thank you.
And, go seniors.
Good luck, juniors.
Yeah, good luck. All right, thank you again, both of you.
Thanks, guys.
Have a good night.
Thank
Drive
you. Good
safely,
night.
please. Thanks, Jay, for catching that. Okay, so, back up to future agenda planning. So when I I wanted to let you know, town meeting, we usually are all together. We do, not all together, you can, so plus you can sit on your own too, but we do attend if we can. I believe it's a 7:30.
It is 7:30.
7:30. I don't think there's a special town meeting.
There's not.
Okay. And then what I was gonna say, she just left. When I did go to the select board meeting, there was discussion about us getting together. I let them know that we were asking for 5.9. Mr. Carlson did a quick math and said it was $800,000 that we were. So that is not a surprise. And then they did talk about us getting together, and then I think Mr. Prisby was gonna go back to them and talk at their meeting. And there was discussion on whether FinCom should be there or not. What I really want to make sure when we meet, because I assume you guys would want to meet, is that they're productive meetings, that we try to limit. There's a lot of people in a room, but there's a lot of really smart people in a room. So I think when I said to them, I really want to tackle this. This is a Grafton issue. This is not a school issue. This is not a town. This is a Grafton issue, and I want to work together with our other boards as a team. And I hope that at least our committee can bring that spirit in, and we can hopefully discuss this thoughtfully and come and work through it, because this is an issue for our town, and when our schools, it affects everybody. Even if you don't have a kid in school, it's gonna impact our town in a meaningful way. So I will it might be via email, I don't know, I've heard different dates. I haven't had an official ask yet, and I know Mr. Prisby did say he was gonna go back. If you watched the meeting, you know that we talked about it. So we will try to get as much as possible, and then we're gonna work with the chair of the FinCom and to really just kind of come up with a thoughtful way to make sure that it's a productive meeting. I have sat in those meetings in the past, and they haven't been as productive as I would like. And I'm very hopeful with the people that we have together now that we can really work towards a good solution for our town. And I'm grateful for that, and I know the great work that you guys are doing on the Sustainability Committee, is going to hopefully, help that as well. And
Are we thinking to doing it later as they progress more, or
I think we wanted to do it sooner. That work, unfortunately, it's just going to
Sustainable
have to.
Commission work is not going to impact this fiscal year.
Right.
So we're looking to finish up, the February-ish. And I guess there's supposed to be a report here November 12th. I got to get that on in front of the committee and say, are we going to be ready for that? Because I see it on my screen.
Oh, yeah.
Unless it's a different sustainability.
No, it's your committee, but we
Oh,
can always,
okay.
that was like a placeholder for an update, that's.
But we'll, we're just starting out, so we're still gathering data, and we're just trying to benchmark against these other communities and figure out, are we doing something wrong? Are they doing something we can borrow? Or are we all just in trouble? And that's kind of where we're at. We're still collecting.
Yeah.
And that's a process that's good. It's taking longer than we'd thought. We initially had a meeting last Thursday. We ended up postponing it due to a quorum issue, but the work wasn't done. And now we're meeting Thursday, and I don't think the work is done, based on what I've
It's a
seen.
lot of work, so we
It's a lot
appreciate
of
it.
It is a lot of work,
Yeah.
and,
Volunteers who have full-time jobs.
I'm just
and
glad
on
we
other
have
committees.
new, fresh faces on it, and it's not, people that are on other committees doing the work, because that can really, it's a lot.
Yeah, it is, and it should be, I think, hopefully really helpful, but.
For next year.
Yeah, well, and I think, I'm hoping that it gives confidence in the town,
Yeah.
that people are moving, that we do have, things in place, and
It's still a great town,
it's a wonderful town.
so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. And I let CPAC know just to come to me when they were ready, and we'll get them on an agenda. So that's where we left it with them, that we're happy to have them whenever they're ready and want to present to us about, the good work that they do. I think that's it, unless anybody has anything else. I had a request, I haven't reached out to her yet, but I will reach out for a workshop for Tracy Novak to kind of talk about communication, which I know is a goal of ours, social media, board governance, to kind of just reset on that. That's on my to-do list, so
Great.
I know she's probably busy through November, but after that we can.
Can we also ask her about budget?
Sure.
Because I've reached out to her before, but like, how does she wants it? There are different ways that she thinks it's better to present it,
Oh, yeah.
and so I'm
She
always
was the one
curious.
who thinks our budget book is really good.
Yeah.
She gave us a shout
Every
out
time
on
I ask
Facebook.
Tracy a question, you know what she says? Ask Dan.
We should get little T-shirts we could all wear.
Ask Dan?
Ask Dan. Be nice. Jay, would you like that?
I would like one.
Okay.
On it.
I'm out.
how-
No, we've been wanting T-shirts for a while.
Are we still on the meeting dates, the meeting
Yes.
topics?
Did you
Okay.
have more? Sorry.
I just had a question about how are we going to frame the fees discussion? How are we going to go about that? Is there going to be a presentation? Is there?
Yes, that's a great question. So Jay and I started talking about it because we knew it was gonna be a lot of work. He pulled updated numbers from what everybody else has done. We'll look at probably our past fee presentation, and obviously we can talk about. I have very strong feelings. I will share about the fees and.
Is there any additional information? So far, there is a couple. Next at the meeting, I'll give them credit. Who puts together every year they update a spreadsheet for every district in the state. It's pretty awesome. So I was gonna wait to get through tonight, but I'll send that to you guys, that full presentation, and then I pulled out of that spreadsheet all of the districts that border us, with the exception of Worcester, and then one ring of towns beyond that. If you want another group of towns,
Is this
just
updated?
let me know.
Like these are, so these are the updated.
Correct, they
ones.
update it every year. It actually will say, there's a column that says when it's updated, but it's not when, they haven't changed. Like, we
Right.
had ours back, it preceded me, the $200 for bus and parking. So they check back every year, and we just say it hasn't changed.
Right.
So that goes for most districts. It's not something, once they put them in, they're not updating by another $5. It's not like lunch
Right.
prices. So I'll have all of that information ready for you.
Sounds great.
Anything above and beyond that, we just need to know.
I might
You'll-
give you
you'll
a
have
couple,
that.
I might give you a couple other districts. If it's not in the spreadsheet, I might give you a couple of other
Should
ones
be.
that.
If it's not, we
Okay.
can call, but that would be
I
surprising.
mean, I'm happy
It's-
to, I'm probably gonna end up calling them anyway,
I
so.
think,
It's a
I
big-
think they're all in the
big one.
district, in the spreadsheet, Amy, but
good.
then Jay pulled out some to highlight, so it would be additional ones that you'd want to highlight in the
Yeah, just
presentation.
one, so it's on one page with the full,
That's
it
cool.
must be 30
Yeah.
pages.
Great.
Yeah,
So we've got those isolated. I can send those tomorrow.
yeah. And then I don't know if I'm guessing we wouldn't take a vote on fees next week or 2 weeks until we kind of think through our budget, I think, but maybe it's what we did with later start times, just kind of talking about it? Or would I
Yeah,
rethink that?
the only other, we can do this for the meeting, or it could come out of it, and we can have a follow-up, but I did last time we discussed it, I want to say 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
We did pull information in terms of rates of participation in multi-sport versus one sport. We had all of that 7 through 12 from Jim Scanlon, our athletic director. I
thought
can certainly
The
get
last
that
one
again.
was really comprehensive, and I thought,
Yeah,
well
so I
done.
could have him update that. I'm trying to
Yeah.
think of what else was helpful.
I was gonna
in
say,
that
I really felt like that whole presentation was really good, and maybe it just needed to be
Yeah,
updated.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. I'll find that.
You know, and the only, I mean, so far, obviously, we haven't discussed raising them or implementing new ones, but you know, we've
We also have new sports, we have, new crop of people, so it might
Yeah.
change a little.
I'll
So
reach
I'd
out
be
to Jim
interested.
tomorrow.
Yeah, that
Thank
would be
you.
great.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. We have that conversation to look forward to. Approval of minutes. So we have a few minutes. So I think what happens for us is we got an email, we had some meetings scheduled, and then the town of Grafton was looking for minutes, but the meetings were canceled, I think, due to weather, or some we just didn't, like, couple ones we would schedule, and then, actually, that was 2017, it was a lot due to weather, but I guess we never officially told the town that I don't know, so we had to submit minutes saying they were canceled, so. That's why we have several of those in here. But we did double check that they were canceled. So, when you have a chance, I will take a motion.
I make a motion to accept the minutes from September 10th, 2019 as presented.
I'll second it.
Motion made second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Great. Motion carries 4-0. And then we have minutes for the 24th as well.
Which one? I missed
On-
one.
Yeah, on 48, Jen,
Oh,
page
the numbers are weird.
here. Yep. They are weird. There's like 2 sets of numbers.
All right. So I make a motion to accept the minutes from September 24th, 2019 as presented.
I'll second it.
Great. Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. Motion carries. I think that's it. We're all caught up. Thank you, Debney.
Do we need to approve the ones that are canceled or no?
I would. I don't
Okay.
think it hurt.
How many of
Okay.
these are canceled? 1, 2?
2.
Just do both in
I
one.
make a motion to accept the meetings of March 15th, 2017, and February 22nd, 2017 as presented.
I'll second it.
Oh,
Oh, it's this one right
I need
here.
a clean second.
Second it.
All right, Heather seconds. All right. Motion made and seconded. All those in favor? Great. Okay, thank
This
you.
one from
Do we have
October
one
8th.
more? That's today.
Oh, no, okay, I just see approval of minutes.
Oh, yeah, that's our item number.
I'm done. Yeah.
Approve the minutes in advance. Okay, I think we're good now. Thank you. All right, we do not have a warrant. You don't need to vote on this, Jay, do we? This is just for signatures?
Yeah, we've already voted on that.
That's what I
This
thought.
is just for signature.
Okay, we do, I believe, have a few policies. I think that's where we're at in our agenda, am I correct? Yay. Yep. So the policy subcommittee did meet.
My book is backwards, that's what's up.
Well, okay. We have, we have 5 policies. The first one is the acceptable use of technology policy and guidelines. So Jen, I think not our last meeting, the week before, you had raised the concern about the headphones.
That was a different one, that was the electronics one.
Oh. Oh, that's right, I'm sorry. This is all right, so we don't have a status in there, but it should be a first reading. Oh, I know why, never mind, I'm so sorry. Let me back up. We have 4 to read. We have the current acceptable use policy in here from pages 1 through 6. We have a new acceptable use policy of technology, policy and guidelines that has been rewritten by Neil and who else, Jay?
It was a committee of
And Tracy.
Neil, Janet Lewis, Chris Miller, Karen Barkin, Anissa Cackley, and I was there as well.
Great, thank you, Tracy. So you'll see on, well, I don't know what it is online. On 65 in the book, there's a brand-new policy made up from all of our, and it's been reviewed by our lawyer as well. So we are presenting this as consideration. We put the old one in just so you had a reference, and that's what confused me, and I apologize for being confused. It's a well done book. So I think, Tracy, if you have questions, if we have questions, Tracy can probably
Yes,
answer
I
them.
can do my best.
And they put a synopsis of changes at the end in yellow highlights.
Motion?
Sure.
Does anyone have any questions?
At the bottom of acceptable use and internet safety policy draft, there's a header that says education of students. And then the next page says acceptable use and internet safety policy draft. Is that supposed to be a header? It's not a separate policy, right? It's the same one.
No, I think that paragraph
Okay.
belongs underneath education of
Okay.
students.
That's what I thought.
I think acceptable use of internet safety policy draft is a header on all 3.
Oh,
It just looks like it's, something new is starting.
I didn't notice it when I read it. I think it's great. I like that it's for everybody. I've actually worked on policies like this in the past, and they're tricky. But I think this is very well done.
Okay. Can I have a motion?
I make a motion to accept IJNDB, acceptable use of technology policy and guidelines as a first reading.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Great. And just because this is brand new, we'll bring it back for one more reading in 2 weeks. Okay. Now, we are moving on to the use of electronic devices in school.
So I did look at the district that I'm in, and in their policies, it's not even in policy. Like, I couldn't, that
Yeah.
letter is not even the policy, and then I looked at the high school policy, they just don't even allow it in the school, in the hallways. So that's just more protocol of what we do, but not necessarily
Gotcha.
policy.
So we discussed it as a policy subcommittee. I'm gonna speak for Melissa because she's not here. But we're still remaining with our original recommendation because it came from the handbook. It was okayed by the principal, and we thought if it turns out to be a problem, Jen had suggested that we have one headphone in, one headphone out. I personally just don't see how that could be reinforced, so we either have no headphones or we allow them to have the headphones. And Jay thought that wasn't really an issue in the high school. And as we kind of said, if it turns out to be an issue, then we can revisit the handbook and we can revisit the policy. But we're still presenting it as is, and people can certainly vote as they want.
I make a motion to take policy JICJ, use of electronic devices in school, as a second reading.
Second it.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All right, motion carries. Thank you. All right, and now we're starting new policy, section A. Yay. And these are just two that we're recommending that we approve as reviewed. The first one is AA, which is just our school district legal status. We double-checked this with the current MASC policy, and it was pretty much the same, and this is just defining our school district as being a legal and kind of what public education is.
I make a motion to accept policy AA, school district legal status, to approve as reviewed.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Great. And then the next one is the same, which is kind of just the foundations on what the school committee is. And again, we double-checked this with MASC's policy, and it was the same. So we felt confident in keeping this as it is.
I make a motion to accept policy AB, the people and their school district, or to approve as reviewed.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? All right, motion carries 4-0. Thank you. We already talked about correspondence. I'll submit Senator Moore's letter to Debbie, so we have a copy of it for the minutes. And we don't need to go into executive session, so I will take a motion for adjournment.
I move to adjourn.
I second it.
All those in favor? All right, meeting